Hello, everyone, and welcome to another panel within the Private Equity Summit Paris, the first one, 2021. I welcome two guests to our Private Equity in Fashion panel here. It's M.Jovanovic of Catterton, the brown fashion consumer goods private equity fund. Welcome, Marina, to the show. And then it's Philip Goch from Kirkland and Ellis, the Chicago originating law firm, very active in many a trophy transaction and also in the field. Welcome, Philip.
Yeah,
great
thanks for having me.
To have the two of you with us. And just before I forgot that, right after our panel, we will have a nice fashion show, I would say, a video of Belgian fashion brand Mona Vilnas, who's also an ASEAT alumna, very interesting, and we're looking forward to that one as well. Well, maybe moving right into our topic here, private equity and fashion. Philip, unpolitely, I may start with you here. As a lawyer, there are many levers for private equity transaction. Apparently, it's the old debt game for once, then a little bit of timing, but very much it's something we call buy and build, at least for industrial transaction. But then fashion, and Marina, we will talk about that later, is quite a specific industry. So do you regard this buy and build model, maybe both of you regard this as suitable for fashion transactions? Maybe, Philip, you can start with the lawyer's perspective.
Yeah, many thanks, Thomas. And as you say, obviously the buy and build strategy is a strategy which we see a lot in other forms of transactions, right? Where the buyer sort of tries to establish a platform, buys one company, does add-on acquisitions to grow the platform. But according to what we see in fashion deals, this is not such a suitable strategy or a strategy you would see so much, just by the very fact of the nature that obviously, the fashion deals are very much about building a strong brand, getting customers to recognize your brand. And I think it's more about nurturing the core, basically, so to speak, and working on these factors and basically working on with what you have, rather than, trying to expand the business by an add-on strategy, and most certainly in the field of, luxury brands, which we are talking about a lot, dealing with a lot.
Yeah. What is your take?
If I may add a couple of points as well. First of all, thank you very much for having me on this panel. It is an honor. And to add on to Philip's comments, Catterton, as you know, is first and foremost a consumer investor. So the way we look at the world is not so much through the lens of fashion, but really through the lens of brands. And we invest behind brands in all corners of the consumer market. It can be consumerized healthcare, it can be premium pet food, and it also can be fashion. And what we see across our portfolios is what Philip pointed out. As long as the brand that you invest in is strong, and the way to measure the strength of that brand is, in our view, is how consumers respond to it. And we do a lot of research on exactly how strong emotionally the connection between the consumers and the brand is. And if you look at these businesses that we invest in through that lens, then it becomes relatively clear why buy and build can often be not the most appropriate strategy. Growing the brand, working on that connection between the brand and the consumers typically involves organic growth. And the way to spur that organic growth, there are, of course, many ways. Making sure that the brand retains the emotional connection, making sure that the brand strengthens its positioning within the variety of what consumers today can access, can be through all sorts of ways. Whether it's the quality, whether it is the positioning, whether it is routes to market and how to access those consumers. There are myriad ways.
Right. So let me act once more as surprised Thomas and chime in another question, if I may. What about testimonials in the strategy of luxury brands? I mean, some of those, really have a strategy, I guess, of never ever featuring testimonials, whereas some of them, and very nice brands like Rolex, you remember this very prestigious scientists and sports stars affiliated campaign of Rolex featured in Monocle and everywhere. So is this part of the strategy an important part, whether to do it and to do it with whom? Are there even, like databases that feature all brands affiliated with certain stars, something like that? Give us a little insight, Marina, please.
Again, if you look at the consumer market through the lens of brands, and again, whether that brand is a high-end watch, or whether that brand is leather goods, or whether that brand is something in connected fitness, which has become a category which hardly anyone spoke about a few years ago. At the core of it, what are the testimonials about a brand? At the core of it, you want to make sure that your brand represents the type of a customer that you want to reach, and you want them to be able to recognize themselves in others who are passionate about a particular brand. So perhaps today we don't call them testimonials, but you look at a brand's presence in media, you look at a brand's presence in all of the social media, and inevitably, ultimately, you do see elements of testimonials. Whether it is because on Instagram I see a particular celebrity or a particular non-celebrity who represents a brand that I have formed this emotional connection with, ultimately will be important to me as a consumer. How the brand navigates this incredibly and increasingly complex world of what testimonials are, visual, verbal, organized, or organizing themselves in the ether, so to speak, is the art of what branding is.
Yeah, and maybe also if I may add to that, Thomas and Marina.
Yeah.
I think also from recent experience we have had in this field, right? I think it's interesting to see that there are basically also different strategies associated with this. I think firstly, for the different channels which you use, but then secondly, also with respect to the persons that you use who are in the testimonials, right? And Thomas, you mentioned Rolex, and obviously their approach is they're very famous people who do these testimonials, but there's also other brands which do testimonials with people who aren't famous at all. And I think there the focus is more on what Marina said, right? You try to build an emotional connection to the customer, and you try more for the customer to see the testimonial and to basically recognize themselves in the person that they see. So I think it's interesting, right? Because obviously it depends how you want to sort of situate and establish your brand, right? And it's probably also to some extent a cost factor depending on who you want to get to do these testimonials. Obviously probably different to get Roger Federer for Rolex than somebody else to do it for a different brand. But I think it's just interesting because it also reflects sort of a different strategy of how the sort of brand looks at their customer, and I think also vice versa, how they want the customer to look at the brand basically, right? So I think it doesn't necessarily have to be famous persons doing the testimonials, but I think quite the opposite can also be a strategy, basically by showing people in normal life situations. And I think since also the channels have changed by which you present these testimonials to the customers or potential customers, right? I think maybe the second part will also become more relevant, right? Because I think in a classical, let's say, print ad, it might be more appropriate or make more sense to have like a celebrity in there, but via the other media channels, such as you mentioned, Instagram and such, right? Maybe it doesn't have to be a celebrity, but maybe it gets sort of the message or the point or the sort of the image of the brand you want to send across better if it's even not a celebrity, right? I think this has many different aspects and is quite an interesting point.
If I may add one other point is it's where you see this testimonials actually played out through who establishes a brand. And by that, what I mean by that is in Catterton's portfolio, we are investors in the Honest company, where, of course, one of the founders or the founder that is publicly known is Jessica Alba. We also are an investor in Rihanna's lingerie line, Fenty X Savage. And the way we approached looking at these brands and what they represent ultimately to their customers was through a trend of women by women. What do we mean by that? There is, amongst the myriad of trends that are fueling certain parts of the consumer market, and then also fueling certain brands that are successful within those trends. One of the very important and powerful trends these days is who is the founder of the company, whose services or wares, physical wares I am purchasing. And amongst a lot of younger millennial as well as Generation Z women, the fact that a brand was started by a woman is incredibly important. Not every not every brand started by a woman has to be started by a celebrity. So we have a number of brands in our portfolios where these are, again, women who seem that they can be very similar to me. So they are not a celebrity, but they started a company. And by virtue of these companies being led by women, I am more likely to buy these brands. So again, is this a testimonial, or is this kind of a feedback loop in a sense from the market to the entrepreneurs, and then from the entrepreneurs back into the market? But we find this exceptionally interesting, this particular trend.
I guess we could go on for hours really about this topic. It's really juicy. And one last element to be added maybe is, yes, you start a company, you are a star basically, but you have certain areas that you could add which are unrelated, right, to your being an R&B star, a sports star, and that's really credible. And then it becomes interesting. You start an X collaboration, right, and then your brand as a testimonial is so strong that you really could switch from the one sports good company to the others, and then you take it away completely. Right. So very interesting. But now, maybe Philip, we talk a lot about transactions here, apparently M&A transaction in the fashion field, in the brand field, we may say. Are there any particular issues? I mean, what you basically sell is a lot of IP, right? So do you have to take care of a lot of different factors within your documentation then?
Yeah, that's a good question. And obviously, every deal has its, special elements depending on the industry which you work in. And as you rightly mentioned, Thomas, I think sort of the whole aspect of IP in the wider sense and also name protection is obviously very important in these fashion deals. It's not IP so much as in there's no secret formula like the Coca-Cola formula which you're trying to protect. But of course, you're trying to protect your design rights, you're trying to protect your brand above all, right? And you're also trying to protect your name rights. And right, I think one point which is interesting in this whole context, but makes a lot of sense if you think about it a little more, is I think also litigation as a strategy, right? And in almost every kind of other business, you would try to avoid litigation to that extent that's possible. But what we do see quite a bit, and I think it's part of the overall strategy, which you have to undertake if you basically run a luxury brand or a very strong brand, is right. You also have to protect brand against attacks from others trying to copy your brand, trying to copy your designs, trying to be active maybe in areas where they can't, according to agreements which you have with the people. So, I mean, they can go, from bigger litigations also to smaller litigations. But I think the companies we see or advise, it's interesting to see how they approach this. And this is actually sort of an active strategy. And there tends to be more litigation than in other fields, just because that's basically a key element. You can't really let these trends start, otherwise it will be difficult to stop them again, right? So you try to basically eliminate those things at the very root, right? I think that's one aspect. And then, of course, there's some particular aspects to the transactions as such, to the transaction, docs as such. It's also interesting to see, what kind of agreements other companies have in place. And that's also different from other fields which you see, right? Whereas in other fields, you may have very formal, very long-lasting agreements with certain customers or distributors. A lot of what we see in this context, right? It's not such a formal contractual setup which you have, right? It's also based a lot on trustful relationships with your suppliers, trustful relationships with your customers, right? It's to some extent not such a formalized process as compared to other fields. And then I think one element which is interesting and basically also ties in and has to do with the business model is, what are actually your distribution channels? Who are you selling your products to? Are you selling them to wholesalers? Are you selling them directly to the customer? Are you now, even though you're generally in the business of doing more wholesale, trying to approach your customers more directly in these days via your online presence and so on? And obviously all these strategies which you follow as a management, those have legal implications and tie in with the that sort of contractual setup which you have to implement. So I think it's quite interesting and has very, very interesting elements where also, and I think maybe Marina, that's also a point for you to touch upon, where sort of the strategy you run, also your PR strategy and also your customer strategy, then has to tie in or needs to be reflected in your legal setup, basically.
Absolutely. I mean, when it comes to as a private equity investor, we of course are in the driving seat whenever we make these investments, in making sure we protect the brands that we invest behind in all the possible ways. But I wanted to make a slightly different comment on you were talking about routes to market and the different protections that come from that. And what we have been seeing in the investments that we make is greater and greater ability of brands to go direct to consumer. That has been really the theme for the past many years, but one that has been greatly magnified over the past year with the pandemic. So basically, brands being able to bypass for greater and greater percentage of what they sell, bypass physical retail and go directly to consumers. And I would say the strength of the brand that is needed to successfully execute on that strategy has to be quite significant. I'm not sure if that dovetails well into some of the other questions we were hoping to cover, but I'm giving you maybe a segue to physical retail questions that we also wanted to touch on.
Really, really true to the course. And we will not discuss Segway, the brand, apparently, which hasn't had such a successful career. Yeah, that's true. I mean, it basically goes in the direction of the customer of one, right? You're really well connected. You do a lot of comments. I mean, originally brands were protected just by means of really dominating the whole process, the whole vertical chain, right? You decided which of the local fashion houses you were distributing your brand to. But there's more of a fashion democracy, maybe, in the sense of the consumer being more powerful. But then where do we buy, right? That's another angle. That's another question. A huge question. I mean, not really tapping too much into the C19 topic, but apparently things have moved away from bricks and mortar. You sit there in your chair, I mean, every fashion house in itself mostly has a portal where you can buy directly, where you can order your fashion, and I mean all the tools, right? If you want to buy glasses, there was no way originally that going to the local, optician or however you call that. But nowadays, you go on a website and you do one screenshot, and then they model all frames around your head, and you really think, why do I have to go to the shop? And that's really for glasses, something specific. For fashion, I mean, you have a certain size, you know your size, you choose your outfit and you test it on. And so it's firstly, two questions coming from that for me. One, how do you grow the physical experience? There's a lot said about, really building an exotic garden around your robes in the shop, but it goes in that direction that you really have to offer something special. And then really related, what is it about bricks and mortar? Will there be a comeback after COVID, or are we fed up of our cities? It's basically the question of the cities. I mean, a lot of restaurants are open up, so will we have the whole spectrum of all national dishes and Goethestraße, Philipp, in Frankfurt, or will there be a comeback of bricks and mortar fashion? What is your take on that?
Maybe I'll try to take the start of this question, and then would love to hear Philipp's opinion as well.
Yeah.
Maybe to plug Catterton again a little bit. We have an internal group that does a lot of research on consumer behavior. We call them consumer insights. Occasionally, unfortunately, we only offer these types of webinars to our investors, but I can maybe retell some of the findings over the past 12 months. To your question on physical retail, and to the question of consuming in general, our conclusion over the past year has been that consumers have particular emotional needs that they're trying to satisfy when they consume. These emotional needs do not go away, whether there is a pandemic or not. But ultimately, how these emotional needs are satisfied does depend on whether you feel it is safe for you to leave the house. So when it comes to purchasing, let's say, a dress, which for example, satisfied a need for me to look slightly different on a given day, or put a little spring in my step because seasons are changing or whatever. Over the past year, the way I would satisfy that need would probably be by buying that dress on the internet. So it is quite tempting to say that because of the pandemic, I will never go back to a store. What one would, I think, neglect to see is that there were a number of other emotional needs that were being satisfied by, going into a store to buy that dress. You see other people and how they dress. You see how that dress is styled with other products. Perhaps you walked by a restaurant where you saw somebody wear that dress, and then you decided to go and buy it. What I'm trying to say is that the kind of the formula, or what was being solved in this pretty simple example, is actually relatively complex. And we've read this everywhere, and we see it now in the streets of London, which are, by the way, quite full with people. Even yesterday during the rain, sitting outside and enjoying their glass of white wine, despite the temperatures being around 10 Celsius. The need for physical interaction of all sorts does not go away. Will it be modified? Will it be subdued? Absolutely. But what does that mean for physical retail? I think physical retail has actually been dying for quite some time. And the types of offerings that are undifferentiated, which essentially feel like, I think when you and I chatted last night, you mentioned Filene's basement, and I chuckled because I was a student in Boston a long time ago when that was a thing. This feeling of entering a warehouse and wading through to find something, I don't think many consumers will miss that. Although sometimes there's a bit of thrill to that kind of Easter egg hunt, so to speak. The physical retail that will be successful will be one that brings you as the consumer closer to satisfying some of the points you were mentioning earlier. Do I now understand what this dress means in terms of who wears it? Do I feel that some of the testimonial points are addressed in the way the dress is displayed? Do I get to understand kind of who I am by how the physical retail is organized? You probably know that brands that started out fully as digital, like Peloton, they have occasionally now stores. I mean, Tesla, also will have stores. We have a real estate investment arm that is basically working on that premise. Certain types of retail will want to be adjacent, and they will want to be within neighborhoods that, as you say, Goethestrasse in Frankfurt has all sorts of wonderful food offering, looks beautiful. Perhaps it has some, design-led offices that also can be used occasionally, maybe not every day of the week for every worker in that office, but smarter and more geared towards experience type of retail will absolutely continue to thrive.
Yeah, maybe to add to that, I think those are very interesting points, right? And I think also the example with the glasses, which Thomas made, and I think also in general, right? So I think that's also
the stores fit very well. I'm tempted to ask you whether it was digitally chosen or in person.
That's the thing. That's actually a good example, right? Because the pleasure about these glasses is exactly the same thing happened, which you just described, right? It's an online store, but sort of as a second step to becoming successful as an online store, they have also opened stores, physical stores again, but I think with a different strategy, right? You don't have 10 stores in Munich where you can go, but you have one store where you can go. And I think that's exactly what you're saying, Marina. That sort of enhances the customer experience, right? If I want to look, I can go to the store and look, but I don't have to. I can do everything online. And I think maybe that's also the general trend, right? And also maybe you also have to differentiate what the product is that you're buying, right? And if I walk down Maximilianstraße here in Munich, right, and look at all the stores that are there, I mean, those are all like the flagship stores of more like luxury brands, right? And I don't think that these are gonna go away, because they're basically not a tool for people to actually go shop there to satisfy, their basic shopping needs, i.e. I have to wear a shirt and a pair of pants every day. But I think, as you say, that's part of the entire customer experience, right? But I think what will go away, and what we also see going away, and what we also see going away, if you look at real estate deals or real estate portfolios, is those shops, which I think were more for commodity shopping, if that term makes sense, right? In the inner cities of not only Munich, Frankfurt, and London, but also of smaller cities, right? And if you look at these real estate portfolios, right, at those, let's say, mid-sized malls in mid-sized cities, those are definitely dying out, right? Because I think that's a fact, or a situation where the customer experience doesn't play such an important role. And I think that's being replaced by the online shopping. And that's what we also see in the legal deals when we look at, real estate transaction and we see these objects, and those are basically dying out. And then you have 20 shops in that mall, and 3 are empty for a while, and then it just tips and you can't save it anymore, right? And I think that's the point which is going away, or where the online shopping is a really big threat to these stores.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's as much of a threat to those big flagship stores, because I think, as you said, Marina, perfectly right, those are part of the overall customer experience which you try to offer. But I think it's all sort of part of your your brand building strategy, right? And also your overall strategy, you know, where do I want to approach the customer with a physical store, and where do I want to approach him, you know, with my online presence. And I think those startups which grow more mature, which then open a physical store as a second step, I think that's just very interesting, because it's basically the same process which bigger retailers are doing the other way around, right? They have strong physical presence, they struggle with their e-commerce presence, they try to build that up, but you also see quite the opposite. So I think it's fascinating, and I think there will be changes, right? But I don't think the answer is this is all going to go away, you know, the bricks and mortar. I think it's just going to be more focused, and people are going to have to think more about how that ties into the overall strategy and what the customer really needs, right? And I think it's that experience point rather than the commodities point. I think it's very interesting.
Right. And two observations from my end are, Private Equity Summit Paris, the FT, you know, ran a story maybe a year ago about a maison that does glasses where they are really built around you. I think Yves Saint Laurent personally was one of their first clients, you know, at an immense cost, but it's really unique. It's really your type of glasses, and you pay 5,000 upwards for it, but it's really constructed, you know, like a stereo. Sometimes really stereo fanatics build the room around their stereo, and it's something like that. So this is the one end, really bricks and mortars, we say, because it's the maison, you know, the original one, and their works are there and everything. And then what you mentioned, Philip, was interesting, because you know, said that's the upper end going to be there on Maximilianstraße for sure for many decades to come. But if you look at, you know, in the journals, the fashion journals, in Monaco, there's an ongoing battle. Who takes the claim of having the #1 T-shirt? You know, if you look at brands like Derek Rose and other brands, they really want to say the white T-shirt done by us is really #1, and partly it's really credible. So that's very interesting. The different strategies, right? All about strategy. I mean, Marina, if you may, or both of you, the Birkenstock transaction, given my German background, maybe some minutes about it, and maybe before, Philip, you talk a little bit, not about the secret, but about some peculiarities of this transaction. Marina, what is really so interesting about Birkenstock?
I think what is interesting about Birkenstock is that virtually everything that we have mentioned over the past half an hour, every single theme and thread somehow finds its way in Birkenstock. You talk about family-owned businesses. This is one. You talk about businesses with craftsmanship that have endured for many, many years. 250, not shabby. You talk about fashion and whether we will, what is fashion? Is it something that changes every year, or is it something that remains constant and that is extremely casual? And how does COVID-19 impact what we wear? Again, big story within Birkenstock, which as I have been speaking to various investors of ours who wanted to know about Birkenstock, some know quite a bit about it. Many Americans feel, well, that's an American brand, and gets really surprised when they hear it's German. And then many Germans, depending on how old they are either saying, how can that possibly be fashionable? Please don't tell me you're going to increase the prices. This is something I've been wearing for the past 40 years, and I really want it to remain the same. I hope you will not make it into high fashion. And then others say, how can this be possibly fashionable? When I was growing up, it was only the nurses who wore it. And then some other ones say, well, you know, I never thought it was fashionable, but now my teenage daughter, this is all she wears. So this is kind of that chameleon brand that is everywhere, that is adopted by everybody. And yet sometimes also quite some people like to make fun of it for being anti-fashion. And I will not mention the famous joke about Birkenstock and birth control, but you can guess the punchline. Birkenstock is an extraordinary company. we are so incredibly honored to be able to partner up with the family going forward. And when I say partner up, really partner up, because they do retain, the family retains an ownership. It's also one of these, as I said, it's a brand that means so many things to so many people, and it is incredibly successful across a number of continents, and yet still has plenty of room to grow. It is one where you were talking about testimonials and collaborations between brands. Birkenstock has, with some of the professional management that has for the first time been in place only over the past decade or so. So rather than just the family running it, which was the case the previous 240 years, Birkenstock has been collaborating with a number of high fashion brands, and yet it has remained accessible and beloved by it seems like every successive generation, including the generation the Zennials, who are in many ways anti-fashion. Anyway, I cannot say more great things about Birkenstock, but one of the great things is also how much growth there is yet to come, and how much of that growth will come from Birkenstock's ability to connect directly to consumers, and change some of the routes to market, and really take the strength of the brand back to itself, not having to go through wholesale and maybe physical retail as much as it had to before. To mention another thread of our previous conversation, which is not to say that we may not have a Birkenstock flagship store, right next to Hermes, perhaps, or with Tesla on the other flank. So I think you can expect that as well going forward.
Yeah. So Philip, any particular stuff within this transaction? What was particularly difficult? Maybe how were you approaching this transaction?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, fully agree with what Marina said, right? I think it's a super interesting brand, and I think it means a lot to a lot of different people, right? And I think, growing up in Germany and also spending some time in the US a while ago in school or so, I think people look at this brand very differently. It's, as Marina says, right here, I think traditionally, at least 10 or 15 years ago, you wouldn't have had the idea in Germany that the Birkenstock shoes were like a fashionable item to wear, right? But I think this has really changed, right? And I think also before the investment which Catterton is making and all, right, I think it's a fascinating story how this, I think, very pure product in its sense, has taken such an interesting development, and how they've sort of been able to reach, I guess, people across every different generation, right? From, I guess, maybe the bit older generation which still wear their shoes, and as you say, to the younger people who start wearing them now also. So I think it's very interesting, because I think obviously they have developed different lines and have, modified the product, but I think in the core, it's still the core product. And I think that's maybe also part of the success, that they have been innovative, but they've also, placed a strong emphasis on their core product, right? And I think as regards to the transaction in general, I think one thing one can definitely say is, I think, as Marina said, this ties in nicely with the points we have discussed earlier in general, right? Where you have this very iconic brand, which is great and has 250 years of history, which has also taken a great development in the last 10, 15 years, but I think which sort of came to a point where they also looked for a partner to basically take the next step in the development, right? And I think you don't have to be an insider to the transaction, to understand the rationale. Only looking at the press release and sort of the public coverage, right? I mean, it makes perfect sense, and I think it's very clear to everybody that this next step, for example, as Marina mentioned, right? Expansion to Asia, expansion to India, also, being stronger in the e-commerce sector, that this is really a point where this partnership between this traditional company and the investor can really work well, right? I think it's a logical next step. So I think it will be very exciting to see what happens in the future. And I can definitely say, sort of as an immediate direction, also, you know, in my inner circle, friends, family, a lot of people who I think wouldn't have bought the Birkenstock shoes a couple of years ago started in buying them now, also as immediate reaction to the transaction, right? So when we had signed the transaction, we had a call with the entire group, and everybody basically reported back the same, that their wives and girlfriend and friends had all ordered Birkenstock now. So I think, Marina, the strategy is already starting to work immediately.
Sorry. Okay, guys. Great discussion. Marina, Philip, thank you so much. We could rant on for hours talking about reviving Elsa Schiaparelli and everything, but now we want to have a nice fashion show here with Ramona Vives. Thanks loads, folks. It was a great discussion, and I hope you enjoy some more panels. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.